Good morning, class. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Christendom. So Christendom is going to be a word that we use to describe what Europe is like during the Middle Ages. So let's look at a definition first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. There we are. So Christendom, it's the Christian world of Europe during the Middle Ages. So Christendom, you can see you have the words Christ and kingdom are both kind of in there. Christendom. So it's the Christian world. It's this idea that everyone is Christian. We all share the same values. We all share the same God. We all get along in that way. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of that here in a minute. But this is what we have during the Middle Ages from pretty much the mid 400s. So actually, even before the Catholic Church falls, not the Catholic Church, even before the Roman Empire falls, we start to see some of this starting to happen, and then it goes up until the Reformation. And so this whole period in between is Christendom. And so what we have here, our image here on the screen, this is the coat of arms of the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church is incredibly important during this era. And so the thing that really helps to unify Europe, really establish Christendom, is the unification under the papacy. So having this idea that all of Europe, we're leaving Greece out, but all of Western Europe at least, has one religious authority that it looks to, and that is the Pope. And so this really gets kicked off with Leo I, who's a Pope, and Attila the Hun, back in 452. So while the Roman Empire is still around, Attila the Hun comes and wants to invade Rome, and Leo I, who's Pope, goes out and meets Attila outside the city, talks to him, convinces him to not invade Rome, and Attila turns around and goes away. And that thing of negotiating not having the city get invaded makes Leo really popular, very much respected, and continues to increase his influence in Italy and then on into, France and Germany and those areas. And so we have that happen. And then, of course, Christendom gets expanded more as a concept once we have the Holy Roman Empire, once that authority of the church continues to expand with Charlemagne and all of that stuff. And so that is kind of the era that we're dealing with. Christendom, it basically covers the whole Middle Ages, but it's this idea of the church being really important and us having this kind of Christian unity across Europe. So let's talk about some pros and some cons with Christendom, because there are a few different things to know about here. So we have our biggest pro that we have is that there's stability. We have, relatively few crazy big wars during the Middle Ages in Europe because of Christendom. So if we look at this map, so this is Europe in 1200, we have so many kingdoms here. We have the Kingdom of Burgundy down here in southern France. We have, right there, we have Kingdom of Lombardy, we have Papal States, we have France, we have Brittany, we have Aquitaine, we have Flanders, we have Northumbria, we have all of these different kingdoms, and we have Germany, which Germany by itself at this time, while you have the Holy Roman Empire going on, you also have like 300 different regional rulers who are working underneath the Holy Roman Emperor, and some of them don't get along well, so it's really quite complicated, and there's a lot going on. We have all of these different kingdoms, but we don't have that much war for a few reasons. So first of all, we have this idea called the divine right of kings. Now, the divine right of kings says that if you are a king because God made you the king. And so what would that mean for people who, who are thinking about trying to take the king out or something like that? It means they're in the wrong. It means you can't really have revolutions. You'd have to go get the Pope to approve your revolution first, and that's hard to do. So for the most part, kingdoms are pretty stable because the guy in charge is approved by the Pope, and people are afraid that they're going against the will of God if they rebel against the king. So that helps to keep the king pretty stable. So we have that going on. We also have smooth transitions of power. They aren't always smooth, but for the most part they are. So whereas in Rome, what was the system like for transitioning between Caesars? Think about it for a minute. they didn't have a clear one. And so we often had assassinations and had all of these problems with different generals trying to take over and all that stuff. The nice thing about admitting that you have a king is that then you're able to do the standard thing that you do with a king, where his heir takes over after him. So you'll have one guy be king, and then his son will be king, and then his son will be king, and you just go down the line like that. And it's really convenient, and you have some smooth transitions of power. You always know which family's supposed to be in charge. It's easy. Similarly with the popes, you don't have the handing off to kids, because popes aren't supposed to have kids, but some of them do in the Middle Ages, which we'll get to that in a minute. But they have elections. So the pope is elected by the cardinals, and so you have a clear way of knowing who's going to be the next pope when the current pope goes away. Now, of course, that gets messy a few times, and there are some issues, but for the most part, things stay pretty smooth. So things are relatively peaceful because of that. And then also, because everyone agrees to some degree that they're Christian, we have the kingdoms working together. So we especially see this with things like the Crusades, when bunch of people in France and Italy and Spain and Germany decide that they want to come over here and fight against the Muslims and try to take back the Holy Land and all this stuff. That is able to happen because everyone is agreed on, yeah, we are all on the same page, we're all Catholic, we all get along, it's great, let's go be an army together. So we have all of that going on. Now, one thing that I want to make sure we're clear on here. The idea of everyone here being Christian, it's nominal Christianity in a lot of cases. So in name only. So if you look at the things that people do and the way that people think and what they care about, they aren't going to be Christian as we understand Christian in a lot of ways. So the same way that if we look at the United States, if you look at census data, the way that people describe themselves, something like 78 or 80% of Americans would identify themselves as Christians. And you probably know from your daily life that that number has to be high. If we look at, who actually reads their Bible on occasion, who actually goes to church, who actually has anything resembling Christian beliefs that line up with the different creeds and things that we've looked at, that number is maybe 20%. It might be as low as 6 or 8%. It's definitely not 80%. And so we have kind of a similar thing going on here with medieval Europe, but you also have the thing of, if you say you're Christian, you have a better chance of being in charge of stuff. And so everyone is going to say they're Christian. No one's going to not be Christian. But how many of those people actually care, are actually, trying to live righteously, that's another question. So everyone's Christian, but yeah, maybe not. So those are, but it does create this stability that we have this agreed upon worldview, this agreed way of thinking about who gets to be in charge and all that kind of stuff. And so that's all good. That helps the Middle Ages to be pretty stable in Europe. On the other hand, we have some cons. So first of all, as Protestants, we would say that having the Pope in charge in this office that he shouldn't be in, that's definitely a con just from a theological perspective and all of that stuff. And him having all of this influence over all of Europe is not great. So we have that. We also have moral issues. So with this thing that I talked about where everyone is Christian in one way or another, that means that you end up having kings who are still slaughtering people and people who are being mistreated and all kinds of crazy stuff that gets approved as, well, it's still Christian though. It's being done by a Christian king. It's fine. And so we have all of this corruption and then having it, kind of tainting the name of Christianity and the name of Christ because it's still accepted as all right. It's pretty common. It becomes pretty common during this period for you to have a king who's a great warrior and he goes out and he kills people and he conquers lands and he does all kinds of stuff and is really just an awful guy, probably has multiple wives, mistresses, all kinds of stuff. Probably not actually multiple wives, but just a bunch of mistresses that he, pretends aren't his anyway. Because he still has to look Christian. But then at the end of his life, he'll donate a ton of money to the church, and in exchange, the Pope will make him a saint. And then he's a model Christian that we should all look to. And because with the Catholic Church, you have the idea of saints being kind of exceptional Christians who we look up to, as opposed to everyone being saints, as Paul describes. So you end up having this thing of, we have kings who we know are awful people who at the same time are saints, and that creates a lot of confusion about what does it actually mean to be a good Christian. and also allows for a lot of political corruption and stuff. And then the other issue that we have that we talked about with our lessons on the Franks and the feudal system, this continues to be a big thing, is that there's ongoing conflict over temporal and religious authority. So temporal means worldly, temporary, so these are kings, and then religious being like the Pope. And the biggest thing that they get in conflict over is who gets to appoint bishops and priests in different areas. So, if you think about it, your pastor has things that he has to do. He has to prepare sermons, all that stuff. But it's a relatively, while it can be a ton of work and can be spiritually taxing and all that, it's a job where you don't have to lift stuff a lot. You aren't in physical danger that much, and you get paid, and you also, at the time here when everyone's Christian, that's a position of prestige as well. If you're a leader in the church, you're also, maybe it's kind of like having a job in local government in addition to being a pastor, something like that. And so the idea of who gets to appoint those guys, because they're kind of part of local government, but they're also definitely part of the church, becomes a point of conflict. Because the Pope thinks, hey, they're part of the church, I should be able to appoint all of them. And a lot of kings say, hey, they're kind of part of my government, I should be able to appoint all of them. And sometimes kings will appoint bishops without talking to the Pope at all, and sometimes the Pope will appoint bishops without talking to kings at all, and then they get in fights, and it's a whole thing. And so we have two really famous examples of that. So the first one is with Gregory VII, who's Pope, and Henry IV, who is the Holy Roman Emperor at this time. This is in 1077. So Henry IV had been appointing bishops and taking money from people, like confiscating tithes that were supposed to go to the church. He was doing that without talking to Pope Gregory. Gregory got angry at him and excommunicated him, told him that he was out of the church, he was no longer a Christian. And since this whole system, all of Christendom, relies on this divine right of kings and everyone being Christian, then there was no reason for all of the local rulers under Henry to pay any attention to him. And so he starts having all of these revolts, and so he ends up traveling from his kingdom all the way down to Italy, and the Pope makes him stand outside in a snowstorm for a couple of days, and he goes and he asks forgiveness, and the Pope says, okay, yeah, you're good, I won't excommunicate you, and lets him, continue being king. So that's a huge power move for the church. The Pope suddenly looks way more powerful. He just made the Holy Roman Empire come and beg for mercy. And so, so that's a big win for the Pope. Then we have Boniface VIII and Philip the Fair. So this one happens in 1302. So in 1302, Philip the Fair pulls a very similar stunt to what Henry was doing. He's appointing bishops. He's collecting some money that should be going to the church. Boniface isn't happy about it. Boniface writes him a letter. It's called a papal bull, B-U-L-L, P-A-P-A-L, B-U-L-L, 2 words. A bull means like letter. Papal means from the Pope. So it's an official letter or edict from the Pope. He writes this letter, and he titles it in Latin, "Listen, son," and basically tells Philip that he's out of line, and he needs to stop breaking the rules, and he needs to follow the church, because Boniface claims he is actually supreme over every earthly king. So this is the absolute height of claimed papal power. Boniface says that he, as Pope, has authority over every single kingdom on earth, and is basically a king above all earthly kings, in addition to being the leader of the church. Philip doesn't take that very well. He gets Boniface kidnapped. Boniface gets beat up. He ends up dying, and then Philip moves the papacy, so where the Pope lives, to France, where he's the king. So Philip the Fair is king of France. He ends up moving the papacy to a city in France called Avignon, which is, I'm not even going to tell you how to spell that. We'll get to that later. But he moves the papacy to France, and we end up having the Western Schism, which some of you guys mentioned as the date for the Great Schism on your timeline. So the Western Schism is where we still have a pope in Italy, but we also have a pope in France. And then there's a point in there where we end up with a third pope, and things get really out of hand for a few years. Finally, they get it back down to having just one pope. But that's definitely a period. If a king is able to drag the Pope to come live in his country instead of living in Rome where he's supposed to be, that's a huge power move for the temporal authorities and makes the Pope look a lot weaker. And so we have this ongoing power struggle, but also at the same time we have some calm and some consistency across Europe with Christendom. So that is your quick lesson on Christendom, and there should be a couple of questions for you to answer. If there's anything that you're having trouble understanding, please put your questions in the student questions channel on our team, and we can get those answered for you so that you can understand what's going on. Have a nice day, guys.